Tennis coaching or coaching in general is a lot of opinion. And I think the fact that we can use now the numbers behind the game to shape what we do, I think is the most critical element of coaching is the ability to utilize factual information, whether that be numbers, like I said, in terms of data, whether that be vision in terms of being able to see what's actually happening to create evidence. The biggest thing is what evidence do you have to support your messages that you're giving your athletes? And we used to debate is coaching art or science? And I said it's an art backed by science. I'm starting to shift a little bit more in the fact that the science probably forms the fundamentals of what we need to train, and then it's how we do that from an art perspective. So the thing that I really like is understanding the numbers that shape tennis and the evidence that shapes it, and only focusing on that. I mean, at the end of the day, we all have an opinion what technique looks like or should look like. We all have an opinion of how we want to play the game, but the numbers tell us the exact that we need to be doing to be able to develop a player from grassroots to pro level. And that's kind of what we're going to go through today.
When you talk about the science and the numbers, what do you actually mean? Because I can imagine there's people who haven't come across this side of tennis before who are like, what's this guy even talking about? And how do I use it in my own coaching?
Well, what I'll do is I'll actually share my screen in a second and show you some of the numbers that I put together in a presentation that I did across the country in Australia here. And that's helped shape me in my coaching. All right. So basically, this was one of the first slides I showed in my presentation. And to everybody that watches this right now, all you'll see is a bunch of numbers and a whole heap of information, a really stacked page. But basically, what it is I talk a little bit about some of the key numbers that have probably shaped how I've coached the game. From the moment I got these numbers, I realized that I wasn't setting my players up to be successful. I was almost setting them up for failure and wasn't hitting the benchmarks of numbers. And what this will also do is help you not only shape your training environment, but also help to reduce injury in our athletes because we'll get the loadings right and what they need to do on a daily basis so their bodies don't spike during a tournament. That's a normal based loading for every player. So, for example, like if you look at up the top, and we're looking up here as to the numbers of serves hit by a player in a match. So this is based upon men playing 5 sets in a Grand Slam and the women playing best of 3 sets, but also men playing best of 3 sets right across the board in terms of every other event. But this is what they hit per match. Now, what I started measuring when I was coaching was I was seeing the fact that, and I started counting this, we were getting only like 40 to 50 serves in a practice session. And what I was actually starting to notice was we were getting a lot of shoulder, elbow injuries based around kids not loading enough in practice and then heading into a match and trying to hit 80, 90 serves, for example, and their body's not being accustomed to it. And then to be able to back it up. So what would happen is a kid would play, in particular in our country, they play 2 or 3 matches in a day at times. So if you think about maybe, let's just base it on 3 sets, which is the WTA. If you're having to hit 70 serves in one match, but play 2 matches in a day and hit 140, but you've only ever hit 50 matches in a day at training, you've underloaded in training and then overloaded in a match. Therefore, the spike in load creates injury. So that for me was a really interesting thought I had around, geez, what do I how do I get this right? How do I get the balance right? So hitting these markers became a really important aspect for me in terms of my coaching. The other one was you look over here and you've got the shots hit, breaking down between forehand and backhand hit on the male and female tour. But you look at that and you think, wow, am I hitting or getting my players to hit, between 400 to 800 balls, in a practice session? Am I getting them to hit a minimum of 13 or 14 volleys in practice, for a male player? Are we playing an average of 60 points that's for 1 set, but maybe 2 sets, 120 points a day to be able to simulate the thinking and decision making that occurs on match day? You look at the shots per rally and you go, okay, well, if 70% of points or just under 70% of points finish under 4 shots, why am I working on the rally aspect so much more than the serve return aspect? Because the serve return starts everything. So I started to shift my thinking around these numbers because it was like making sense to me that the match and the training in the match um, translation wasn't occurring well enough for me and for my athletes. So you see them train, you go, well, they're training well, but they weren't translating that to match performance. So if you look at the average time per rally, and the highest amount of time per rally on like is 7.7 seconds on a clay court. All my rallies were lasting like 2, 3 minutes. I was trying to get the kids to rally longer. But it's not the rally itself; it's the speed of rally. It's the ability to control under speed, under movement, under pressure, being off balance. So I was kind of like, all right, we need to start thinking about how do I simulate the game more often, as opposed to just allowing kids to hit balls. Um, 4 direction changes per point. So a lot of the time we hit up and down the line, we hit cross courts, we hit down the middle of the court. There's no direction changes. So how are we simulating hitting on the move to be able to simulate what the game is offering our players? Um, and the other one that I thought was important, and the time, are we simulating the time between sets, change of ends, and during points? Are we able to give our players time to think rather than just strike balls? And I'll give you a prime example, Connor. So I had I'll take this off for a second, but I had a guy who's an expert in physics and tennis, and he's a coach, and he spoke to us about um, the ball spends 0.003 of a second on the strings, and I was like, that's interesting, 0.003 on the strings. So all of my coaching in my last 25 years, I focused so much on unit turn of the shoulders and drive the legs and work the ball, whatever it is. You think about the technical side of the game and hit the ball here, hit the ball there, all that sort of stuff. The biggest thing about tennis that I realize, if it spends 0.003 of a second on the racket, but the ball travels from your end to the opponent's end for a second, it travels for 1 second from your opponent's racket to you back. So it's 2 seconds it spends in the air, and it spends 0.003 of a second on your racket. And we focus everything on that 0.003. Are we setting our players up to be successful, or are we not? Are we focusing on the receive element of the game because the numbers tell us that it spends 2 seconds in the air and 0.003 on our racket? So what are we spending most time on when we are training? Our thinking, our decision making, our perception, our anticipation is one of the things that we probably lack in our coaching. And that, to me, those numbers stand out because then it reshapes how I thought about training. So I do a lot of work now around perceiving speed, spins, heights, depths, widths, etc., and getting players to understand how to cue and read the game, as opposed to just how do I hit the ball back. And it's made a massive difference in my coaching and also in the ability to translate my players' performance in practice to matches. So I hope that gives you a snapshot of how I'm thinking about data and how I'm utilizing the data to shape my environment.
Yeah, it does. And if I mean, I've seen that slide before, and I was with you when you were touring around the country giving that talk. And for someone seeing that the first time, it's absolutely mind blowing. If you've been in tennis for a while, just going about it how you used to go about it, right? And just focusing on the technical side of the game. But I guess one question that pops up straight away is what you first talked about in terms of the sheer load of certain strokes, and just how much time players need to be spending practicing. How do you actually build up to that during practice with your young players? Because I imagine you don't just go straight from zero to hitting 80, 90 serves every practice session every day.
Yeah, and that's a good question, mate, because the biggest thing is how do we load them from a young age and gradually over time get to the point where we do that. Now, we're looking at the ATP WTA numbers, so the top of the game where we've got prime elite athletes working every day on physical, mental, technical, tactical. And then we're thinking about the players we have, which are, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, whatever it is. So they're kids, right? So it's a matter of gradually year by year increasing that volume, both from a time perspective and from a loading perspective, and learning how to do that. So we look at an hourly ratio of 1 hour per age on court. I think I've mentioned this before in a few other sessions, and then we look at zero point 0.5 of an hour per age off court in terms of physical development. So Um, if you think of that model, that gives you a framework to work within to gradually over the years develop that time on court. And then you start to measure numbers of balls. So we do that daily, trying to measure the amount of number of balls. And obviously, you can't go from a kid who's playing once a week to try and hit 6, 7, 800 balls in a day is going to be challenging. But over time, you start to gradually increase that load as they get a little bit older and physically more capable. And that's the challenge we have as coaches, and that's the art of coaching, right? So we talked about the science just then, but that's the art is gradually increasing as they get older.
That makes a lot of sense. I know for a fact that this isn't the only data that you refer to and use. You actually collect data from your players themselves. Can you talk a little bit on that?
Yeah, so we've obviously spoken a little bit about this in the past couple of mentoring sessions as well, where we create. The easiest thing I did was create a YouTube channel, film every one of my kids' matches that they play, and utilize a data analyst to give me the numbers. And what I then do is we look at benchmarking those numbers against the world's best juniors, so ITF level, which we've got numbers on, and then looking at college level and looking at pro level. The one thing I measure at, and this is a little secret of mine, so don't tell anyone, except for all the people that are online here and that are going to join. But I always measure against the next level, never on the level they're at. So if I'm looking at a player in development, I never go, okay, to be as good as a kid of your age is what you've got to do. I look at, no, if we want to go past that kid, we want to go to the next level, we have to look at what the next level requires us to do and try and bridge that gap. Somehow, by the time we get to that age or level, we're at that level. So pushing players past where they're currently sitting and putting them out of their comfort zone. Because if I talk about kids of their level, that's their comfort zone. We remain like in a comfort area. I need to stretch them a little bit. And the only way to get the best out of someone is to stretch them. I'll give you an analogy that helps me with this, Connor. So do yourself a favor when we get off this call. I want you all to look at how to train a flea. Okay. So you're all probably looking at me going, this guy's psychopathic. Yep, possibly. How to train a flea. So you get a jar. Oh, it's a glass of water for me right now. You put the fleas in the jar and you put a lid on it. Now, fleas are an insect that are jumping all the time. They jump, they jump, they jump. That's what they do, right? It's on YouTube. There's a video of it. And what happens is when you put a lid on the jar, they jump to the height of the lid, right? And they keep hitting their head on the height of the lid. So they do that. You keep it on there for a few days and you take the lid off. What do we think will happen? Well, they don't jump out of the jar. They stay at the height at which they've been trained to jump at. When we train an athlete, there is no difference. If I train them to be at the level of everyone else in their age group, I'm putting a lid and a ceiling on where they can possibly go and not allowing them to grow past that too quickly. If I put a lid on that is higher than what they can probably achieve and stretch them, then they're always going to continue to try and fight for that. When they get closer and closer, I lift the lid again. Okay. And that's how development works, is you don't keep them in the same place for too long. You continually stretch them. You continually make sure they're striving for something and trying to achieve something that is slightly unattainable, but they're striving for it. That's how you keep that fire in the belly with athletes.
I love that analogy. That's brilliant. What about for coaches that maybe don't have access to a data analyst? I know that there's some pretty simple things that they can do to start collecting data from their players.
Yeah, you can either do it manually, which I still do. And I can actually show you one of the manual things that I do. So let's go back to my Prezzo. So I talk about in my presentation the way that I used to take data, and it's all handwritten. And I still do it to this day. I still take some data handwritten when I'm watching because it actually makes me feel the match a little bit better. So if I need to talk to a player in a rain delay, or if I can coach on court, this is kind of the stuff that I do, and it looks quite all over the shop messy, but it gives me an opportunity to know what I'm going to say to the player and give them some evidence behind it. But you can also use apps like Swing Vision for us. One of our partners at the Tennis Menu, they're great in terms of an AI app that you can utilize to video your match and get some instantaneous data. And that's just so valuable for a player to see straight after a match, to give you the facts of the match rather than the opinion. So You can do it manually, you can do it with an app, but I think taking data is critical to creating evidence behind the messaging.
Yeah, and what's the first step if you're a coach who is new to this whole data thing? You've just been doing old school coaching, which, to be honest, is probably the majority of tennis coaches. When you look at the wide spectrum and the casual population, most coaches wouldn't be using data to this degree at all. Um, if I'm a coach and I want to get into it for the first time, where should I start with my players?
I guarantee you, every coach is doing data. And what I mean by that is, even when I didn't know anything about data, I was feeding balls to kids saying, all right, you've got to get 10 in the deep part of the court. You've got to get 10 down the line, 10 cross court in the court before we can move on. So we're actually measuring without measuring the success rate of what we do. All right, let's rally for 30 seconds and see how many balls we can hit in 30 seconds. Let's do it again, try and beat that. So we're still in some way, shape, or form doing our data. And I think that's important to understand that even if we think we don't know, we probably do know. We just probably don't know that we're doing it. So I think that's the first step. Second step is like maybe start measuring as simple as unforced errors, forcing errors, and winners. Maybe start measuring how many serves get hit, how many serves go in, and how many points they win from that. So then all of a sudden you can start to create, numbers that you can utilize to give evidence-based feedback. But we all do it. We all measure something: time, balls hit, speed of ball. We all do it. So I think it's just trying to do it so that the players know it, that you're doing it, and then they get evidence behind. If some kid comes off and says, "I played crap." Okay, but this is what you did really well. Here's the numbers behind your serve. Here's the numbers behind your unforced error to winner ratio, and at least give them a chance to say, "Oh, maybe I did play okay," and take away the opinion and put factual information on it.
I think we may have covered this in the past, but for those who haven't heard, when do I start implementing on data that I collect from players? Because like you said, they might have one match where they go, oh, I played shit, but it doesn't mean they are shit. And maybe they served badly in one match, but it doesn't mean that the serve's their biggest problem or the thing that you need to work on. So when do you start to actually implement on the data that you collect?
That's a good question. When it becomes a trend. So I talk about trends versus events. As a coach, never ever jump on an event that happens once. If it happens two, three, four times, it starts to become a trend. If the serve goes off for 4, 5, 6 matches in a row, oh, well, and there's a trend happening here. If the serve goes off for one match, but it's back on the next match, it wasn't a trend, it was an event. So, thinking about whether it's a one-off or whether it's a consistent theme, I think that is critical. Like that kid that hits one forehand in the bottom of the net. And then as a player, you're like, oh my God, like, what are you doing? You've got to lift the ball. Yeah, but hang on. As a coach, I should stop and go, what's happened once? I don't need to jump on that, let it go. It's okay. Just see if they adjust it. Because what we have to teach them to do is adjust the event, see if they can make it work better next time. And if they can't, we can give them a bit of a nudge. And if they can, great. So then they can problem solve in matches. So we sometimes tend to overcoach Connor, and I'm a big believer of trends over events.